My name is Kate McIver, and I am your host for this session with Arent van Spijker, founder of Continuous Innovation Framework. On this session, for the two biggest pitfalls in corporate innovation are not about innovation. Corporates that excel at creating value through innovation have two things in common that most other corporates lack: focus on innovation flow and transfer of ownership. In this dynamic presentation, Arent, author of the book Continuous Innovation, explains why flow and ownership are inevitable to succeed, but often form the biggest invisible obstacles to success. He will demonstrate structural solutions to embed in your innovation process using examples from his own experience in corporate innovation. Arent, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. Thank everyone for being online and taking the time to listen to my presentation. It's always good to have a crowd. Even though I can't see you, I know you're there. And I'm looking forward very much to interacting with you in this session. My presentation is called Continuous Innovation. It is about the two biggest pitfalls that I believe in that I've found in my practice. And I really want to stay away from doing a boring slide changer. So I've built in some interaction in this presentation. And I'm going to tell you exactly how that works. We're going to use Mentimeter. So if you have a mobile phone that you've switched off and tucked in a drawer, so not to be disturbed, please take it out because you'll be needing your mobile phone. Otherwise, you can go to a website if you want. So you can use your browser as well. But since you're already watching to the screen, your phone will also do. First of all, I'm going to give you a small, you should be seeing my screen right now. Are you seeing the video for yourself, or are you seeing my?
We can see your screen, and right now we see the presenter if you want to swap the displays.
Yeah, will do. Thanks a bundle. So,
perfect.
As professional as it goes. So the two main things that are interesting to know about me in the context of this presentation is that I'm the author of a book called Continuous Innovation, which I published early this year. And it is about a concept that I'm going to explain to you in this presentation called continuous innovation. On the left-hand side, you will see the stuff that most people know me from. It is the Continuous Innovation Framework, which is a blueprint for an organizational process that will allow corporates to innovate faster and with less waste and a faster time to market for innovations, called the Continuous Innovation Framework. Both are going to be addressed, although I'm going to be talking more about the concepts of my book than about the framework. But anyway, you'll see both in this presentation. Feel free to participate in this setup. If you want, you can participate in a Q&A, but also I would like you to interact and share some information with me through a system called Mentimeter. Now, if you have a mobile phone or if you have a second screen, open a browser and go to www.menti.com and add the number for this presentation. The presentation number is 3622276. And if you start that, then whenever we come to a slide that has an interactive system, then you can vote there, or you can add your comments if you want. Also, feel free to use the chat, if you will. I'm already seeing that some people are introducing themselves on the chat. I can look at the chat with while I'm doing my presentation, so that's good to know. Feel free to interact in the chat as well. I don't want to be just a presenter, but an interactor as well. So let's give that a go. Let's see how that works in practice. On the slide, you will now see the question, what are reasons why innovation fail in corporates? Let's see if we can do some interaction here. If you go to menti.com and you type in the code, it will now show you on this code the option to fill in some answers. So if you do that, we'll get a nice word cloud for this. So take some time to see what you think are the biggest reason why innovations fail in corporates. And I'll go to my own mobile phone to do that as well. There you go. Budget, resources, focus. Change management. Oh, long-term planning. Culture. I see a few mentions of culture. Pretty good. Where are the companies at? Lack of resources. No long-term plans. No executive support. So I guess judging from the answers that I'm seeing on the slide, quite a few of you have the same type of problem recognized. So there are some common problems: no executive support, or the culture doesn't enable it. Fear of failure, fear, wrong measurements, no executive support. So it's management, lack of strategy, lack of resources, lack of budget, which is the resources, long-term planning. And I see one, ownership. I don't know if that one came from the title of this presentation or because you have an experience with that, but the commonalities here are pretty clear. It is budget, leadership, culture. It's not one thing. There is not a clear reason why innovation fails, and it fails usually because of a combination of these things. It is a difficulty to address budget or resources, time of people. It is the difficulty to give direction. It is the difficulty to actually manage the change. And it's exactly those things that I'm going to talk about. So thanks for sharing. And I'll be getting back to the things that you've mentioned in the word cloud. I would like you to participate in a small exercise. So if you have a piece of paper on your desk, anything will go, pen and paper. It doesn't need to be big, but I would like you to draw this simple graph. And the graph is on the left side. You have the technology capabilities of your organization. For a particular innovation, you are very unfamiliar with that technology or very familiar with that technology. And from the perspective of organizational and market capabilities, you are very familiar with it as an organization or very unfamiliar. Now take 3 out of these 6 technology innovations, 3 technologies that might be relevant for your organization. Pick 3 and try to put across for each of them, or a small dot, where you think that technology fits on the capabilities of your organization and your organizational or market capabilities. So I'll give you an example. Blockchain for a blockchain startup or for a bank might actually fit better into their market and organizational capabilities, but they might be very unfamiliar with the technology. For some, cloud will be in different positions. So try to find out an application for these technologies in your company and say, okay, are we ready for that technology? And are we ready as an organization for that type of service? And then try to put a cross on these 3. And I'm just going to take, since I can't see you or I can't see any raised hands or any other video from you, I'll just give you about 2 to 3 minutes to fill this out. And it's interesting because you're going to be benchmarking that in the rest of the presentation. So take some time. Feel free to use the chat if you need more explanation of what I just said.
Can you define what you mean a little bit more by organizational and market capabilities? Can you maybe give some more examples?
I can actually. It is the way in which your company or your organization is ready as an organization, or if it fits your market. So, for instance, if autonomous vehicles, so we've had an example where a company uses drivers to deliver particular packages to their customers. Maybe not a UPS, but smaller than that. They were working on autonomous vehicles, and they had relatively high familiarity with the technology of autonomous driving. However, whenever they wanted to put these cars into the market, they would immediately hit their own organizational blockage because of the drivers that would protest against this, or because people were not used to handling autonomous cars. Repair shops had difficulty doing that kind of thing, fixing autonomous vehicles. So their organization was not completely ready. That was very unfamiliar with autonomous driving. They were more familiar with drivers.
That makes sense. I was even thinking for, I'm charting these for our innovators, which ones could apply to us as well. So, yes.
Another example is from a company that started using drones for making measurements on building sites. And their organizational discomfort was that the fact that it didn't have any drone pilots. And they didn't know exactly how to measure that, how to translate the measurements coming from the drones to their normal systems. So they didn't have any input for that. But it could also apply to your market. You could have a new technology, but the market wouldn't be ready for it. So banks and blockchain usually have that problem. They are organized well to have that technology, but their market will not accept blockchain because it's, it has this image of very unstable, unreliable, unpredictable technology.
Thank you.
So maybe we've had a few minutes to do this. I hope you've been able to plot this for your own organization. Now let's see why I asked you to do this. It's actually very interesting to look at organizations from the standpoint of innovation, to look at the technical and execution uncertainty and the market and organizational uncertainty. I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with McKinsey's 3 Horizons matrix, where we have Horizon 1 innovations, which are innovations that are pretty close to home. You're comfortable with the technology, and they're innovations on your current process. And then Horizon 2 innovations are innovations that are slightly further away. They're transformative. They have an impact on your business, but they're still in the existing business. And then Horizon 3 might be all the new, far away, high-tech, visionary stuff. That is actually, if you want my honest opinion, I think it's a pretty shaky model, and I would love to discuss why I think McKinsey's Horizon model was good in the 1990s, but it's not so relevant anymore, or it lost some of its relevancy, or it needs more detail. And one person that did that was Rita McGrath. She's a Harvard professor. She was on the Innovators Unconference, Connect Unconference. And she created something called the Opportunity Portfolio Matrix. And basically what I'm showing you is based on that. And it takes the notion that most of the innovations are now technology driven or highly influenced by technology. And that gives us an execution uncertainty, but also a technology uncertainty in itself. So if you use really innovative technology, something like blockchain, it is still a little bit unpredictable. There's a lot of uncertainty about the technology itself. It's not, as they call it, technology readiness levels in NASA. It's not flight ready yet, maybe sometimes. But also, it's maybe not flight ready for our company. Even though it's proven technology, we might not be able to handle it very well. So there is an uncertainty to this technology and the way in which we are able to execute. The same goes for market and organization. We do not know if it's close to home, it's close to the markets that we know, but sometimes innovations push us into new market territory, markets that didn't even exist. So the market for self-driving cars, or the market for blockchain solutions for proof of provenance, for instance, technology that didn't exist before blockchain. So we can create new markets, but also, like I illustrated before, it might have an impact on our organization. So on this plot, you will innovate in what McKinsey will call Horizon 1, what I call Plateau 1, is optimization. It's doing what you already did using more technology. And that's not bad. In fact, it's very profitable innovation usually. And some people think, well, that's not called innovation. It's incremental improvements. My take on that is that anything that is new from the perspective of your company, anything that you haven't done before and that you find difficult to develop, is innovation. It may not be as far-fetched as, for instance, level 2 or plateau 2 or transformational, but the impact is there as well. And you probably spend less time and energy on it, and it generates a little bit of cash or a particular advantage. But if you go a little bit further, you become transformative. And the interesting thing is that if the technology uncertainty becomes bigger, probably the impact on your organization and market is also bigger. And I'll let you know a little bit how that works in an example that follows. But just let me explain the third circle. The third circle is where we use the very uncommon technology, very new stuff in markets that we don't know yet, or in an organization that needs to be changed in order to do this. We come to the zone of disruption where we find new business models. And usually this is done with completely new technology, but not always. So I've worked for one of the largest retail chains in my country, and they started doing online ordering and delivery service. They run 600 stores, 600 retail stores in the country, but they had never done online delivery. For that was a disruptive new business model. Even though all of the technology that we used of e-commerce and delivery trucks was all readily available. However, the technical and execution uncertainty for this company was extremely high. They were operating in a new market for home delivery groceries, and they were certainly not organized to do this. They were completely focused on delivering stuff to stores, and then customers would come and pick it up in the store, and running a smooth operation on those retail stores rather than doing home delivery. Now, this was less than 5 years ago, so it happens every day around us. Existing technology might also have a high technology and execution uncertainty. But the innovation that I'm going to show you off, one of the projects that I did also about 5 to 6 years ago, was the one for a newspaper publisher. And if you look at this chart from the perspective of the newspaper publisher, staying close at home, staying within your market and organizational certainty was desktop publishing. When newspapers first started to innovate, they started innovating and optimizing their core processes. So desktop publishing or computer-to-plate printing, that was actually an innovation that was close to home. If you take it a little bit further, you will see that online newspapers, printing newspapers on a computer screen, actually brought not just a digital revolution in being able to understand how website building works, but also it created a difference in the process of the company, because the newspaper now didn't have to do with deadlines anymore. So the editorial board of the company had been geared for 100 years towards a publishing deadline at 5 o'clock in the afternoon to meet the next morning, the paper next morning. And now, with the arrival of the internet, the deadlines faded, and that meant a big dent in their organizational structure. And it also offered new markets for high-speed advertising, but also different types of engagements with content. They could publish more individual websites for particular target areas, for instance. So their markets changed, and their organization needed to change. And when we came in to help, we worked out with this company a way to start creating reader profiles and to give people access to these particular readers, not just for advertising, but also for content services. And that, again, was high tech. It was artificial intelligence, but it was also a completely new market and a completely new organization to sell data services rather than news or content. And that's the point where the transformation or the disruption was biggest, because the content that the paper had been creating all this time was no longer the most important thing. It was actually a reason for people to send their data so that this company could sell its data. So we have this model, Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, or Rita McGrath has different names, and we call it Plateau 1, 2, and 3. But this model is, keep it in the back of your head. So let's get interactive again. Pick up your mobile phone or go to the Menti site and let me know in your organization on which plateau. Plateau 1, Plateau 2, or Plateau 3. Or sorry for the viewers at home, it's Plateau 1 is in the bottom left, and the middle is Plateau 2, or in the top 3. Or spread across evenly. Where is the focus of your innovation in your organization? So not where it should be, but where it actually is.
And we had a question come in too, maybe this might help for this answer. Can you further define, the disruption from an internal point of view, disruptive for my company?
So disruptive for this company, actually, let's stick with the newspaper. The newspapers found out that it was building personal profiles, reader profiles with people's interests, people's background, people's income level, by analyzing what they were reading about. They know their personal interests, but they can also have some statistical backgrounds, for instance, from their subscriptions on the newspaper, how old these people were, what kind of income category they were. So they were building personal profiles from their readers, like hundreds of thousands of profiles for all of their readers. Then the disruption was that the board needed to acknowledge that at one point the content maybe was not the most important stuff that they were selling, but the content was actually a driver of collecting more data to fill those personal profiles. Those personal profiles are extremely valuable. And that is a disruption inside the organization. And in effect, in newspapers, it is interesting because the editorial board is shielded off from the commercial side of the organization, because the news is the news and you cannot meddle from a commercial perspective with the news. But it really put a strain and a disruption in this company to set that apart from a data perspective. So there was a fierce debate about whether we could manipulate content in order to get more personal data. In the end, by the way, they found a very good way. But it took quite a bit of discussion. They found quite a good way to keep the journalistic integrity intact while maximizing the personal profiles. All right, we have 22 responses. I think most people are in Plateau 1 and Plateau 2. There are actually very few in Plateau, none in just Plateau 3, but 4 across plateaus. And I was actually kind of expecting this, because a serious group of companies will not go beyond Plateau 1. And I'll show you in a minute why that is. And then some companies will focus on Plateau 2 only, but I bet you, and I can't get your response, but if I was in a room, I would now address these people and say, I bet you that you're having trouble getting that to work. And it has the same reason why the other 8 companies probably stick to Plateau 1. And that is exactly because you're not focused on flow and not on transformation of ownership. So let's go do that. So first cut we need to make in this model is the one between Plateau 2 and Plateau 3, because Plateau 3 is actually, if you're not careful, Plateau 3 is a direct threat to your existing business. And between Plateau 2 and Plateau 3 is what I call the barrier of capital destruction. This is why we often hear the phrase, disrupt yourself before somebody else does it. And there's this notion that in the top right corner of this model, you need to completely destroy your own business for this to succeed, or start something outside of your organization because your current organization can't handle it. It is true that it is extremely difficult to be disruptive inside your own inside your own company. And you should have some way of evaluating the options that you have in the future for these disruptive initiatives. Now, for me, it is innovation in the purest form, but it is not necessarily the only way to innovate. But it is something that you need to understand that what you're doing is building options for the future. You're not actually building your future company. You are creating options or stepping stones, as Rita McGrath calls them, for future business. So you're still keeping your options open, bet on 4 or 5 major topics, and just see where it comes out. I think actually the most interesting part in continuous innovation is inside your own organization. There's huge value to be created through innovation, but we need to see it as one area of attention. And between those two is actually another barrier. The barrier is what I call the glass ceiling of transformation. Now, the theory behind this is very simple. In the optimize circle, we have an organization that is fully geared towards optimizing the performance of the existing organization. This is why those 8 companies have a primary focus on innovation in Plateau 1. We're trying to make whatever it is that we already do more efficient so that we make more money. Now, we all know that is an ending story. So some companies will say, well, we need to transform. We need to, use the new technology that becomes available, anticipate to market changes in the transform, and need to move to Plateau 2. But they will find that it's very difficult to get there because the Plateau 1 organization is simply not willing to move. The reason why is that all of our KPIs are geared towards staying within this quadrant. All of our performance metrics, all of our success criteria, are in the optimized circle. They're not to transform. They are to stay the same and reduce the risk and make sure that we stay as efficient and effective as possible. So we desperately need to break out and break through a glass ceiling. And that glass ceiling is created by our organization. So my statement is that innovation is as much about managing innovations and managing the introduction of new technology or the introduction of new processes. It is also about managing reorganization. It's about making sure that your organization adjusts to this new standard at the cost of being inefficient. Now, it's exactly the point where we spend too much time focusing on the innovations itself. When we discuss innovations, it's always about technology. It's always about features of products. It is about how a particular process will work, where we should be concerned about how we're going to get it to work in our new organization, because we assume a few very important things. And as you know, Steven Seagal has this terrible, great movie called Under Siege that I shouldn't advise you to watch because it's really bad, but it has the most interesting sentence of all. Its assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups. Innovation gets killed. Innovation does not succeed because we make assumptions about the outcome and we stick to them. We don't prove them in practice. So the whole lean startup movement is about proving our assumptions. But when we introduce these lean startup developed innovations into our organization, we introduce a whole lot of new assumptions with that. So the first assumption is that the further development of the innovation is aligned with business objectives. Hey, we did this to make it more efficient. We did this to improve. This is our future market. It's not aligned with our business objectives. Business objectives focus on today and tomorrow, not on 3 weeks from now. So it's aligned with a potentially strategic objective. We need to be ready for the market of tomorrow or next week. But it's not actually it's usually not a defined strategic objective. We focus on business objective. We focus on today's KPI. We also assume that capacity for further development is guaranteed because an innovation looks successful in the experimentation phase or even in the early scale-up phase. There is always competition on capacity, on time and money for further development of everything. If you've ever worked in an agile development environment, you know that managing the backlog of your agile release train or your agile scrum of scrum teams, you will know that there is always a fight for capacity on building new features. Innovation is the least proven valuable stuff that fights for a place on this capacity and budget line. So this is also why in the word cloud, we found out that budget or lack of resources is a problem in innovation because we assume that there is capacity for further development, but there usually isn't any. We also assume that line management is enthusiastic about change. It's not, because we push line management to give us the biggest bang for the buck. And change brings cost. Change brings disruption of an efficient process. So we really don't want change. Even though line managers will come up to you and say, this is a fantastic innovation, I really love this technology, it's going to be big, they don't want it in their department because it will create change and they will not make their targets. And for the same reason, senior leadership, we believe if they will show a positive interest in gradual growth, they want big bangs, short decision-making, they want fast results. These people, senior leadership, are about big blobs on the horizon. And when you're in the experimentation phase, innovations have a big promise. And they're interesting for senior leadership because they have potential. But when you start growing them and building them in this scale-up phase, things get slow, things get tacky, things get tedious. You're being stopped. You need to, fine-tune stuff. And you move from explosive potential to gradual growth and slow process. And senior leadership is then not so interested anymore. This is all understandable, and it's nobody's fault, but this is how we've arranged our organizations to work. So go back to your own organization and try and see what are the assumptions frequently made in your organization. Can you name 3? Just sit and think. What does this mean for you? What are the assumptions that you make that you might not be, that you maybe shouldn't do?
And while we wait for those responses to come in. I do see Oscar has raised his hand. If you want to maybe come on mic and ask your question, Oscar, you'll just need to unmute yourself. Okay, maybe not right now. That's totally fine. Let's see. Also, we had a question come in. Let's see. The reorganization or change by the transformational innovation can be limited to a part of the organization, which would be much easier. Or do you see this differently?
No, in fact, I'm in favor for small starts. Start small and build bigger. Yes, probably. Actually, an hour ago, I was in a meeting with an insurance company that had a neat application that it was basically an app that people can install on their mobile phones so that when they were in a car accident, they could call up the insurance company, and through this app, the insurance company, the expert, the damage expert, could directly view with the client, could directly see what the damage was and make an estimate on how to handle that damage or where to go for repairs. It has a huge potential to save cost and make the process faster. I mean, these are like 70% faster time to resolution for the insurance company and maybe a 60% reduction in cost for experts visiting that car physically. But the thing is, we don't want to roll it out all over the insurance company at once. So we started with the B2B market where we have relatively often we are in touch with these clients that are fleet managers from a fleet, so that we control from the client side as well, and then we gradually roll out from there. So yes, it has potential in one area of the company. Try it out there, and then if you see the need or the use to scale, that is the best way to go. So,
thank you.
Some of the nice assumptions that we have. By the way, is that an answer to the question? I don't know who asked it, but please let me know if that's sufficient answer.
Yeah, Karsten, let us know if you want to type in the chat, or if you want to come on mic, just let me know.
All right, some of the assumptions on screen. You're making assumptions based on hunches, not on data. Assumptions that you are already innovative, that you cannot improve. That is actually a big one. The assumption that launch is success. I like that one. So once it's in the market, it's a success. That's actually the biggest wrong assumption that you can make, because when you launch, it's the beginning. And it's probably the start of a very long and tedious and difficult journey. Success is when you all sell your shares and go to Ibiza. The assumption is that we can do it cheaper. The assumption that innovation equals technology is an interesting one. Like I said, there are lots and lots of innovations to be made with easy technology, or easy instruments. As long as they're not familiar to your company, it's innovation. The assumption that ideas don't need budget. This is the under budgeting of innovations. Actually, I'm very much working with another client where I'm trying to convince management that they should think bigger. Their innovations are too small. They're doing a whole lot of innovation, and some of them are really successful, but they should think bigger and push more money into it. It will get even bigger than that. One very important one is understanding the client needs. We believe that we know what the client wants. That is definitely one of the frequent assumptions that is wrong. All right, thanks. I hope that by thinking about this, you've put yourself to a little bit of thought. Is where actually do we put the assumptions in scaling up our innovations? So actually, if you look at the Plateau 1 and Plateau 2 and Plateau 3, the other assumption that we as innovation managers tend to make is that these plateaus are fixed, or that our Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3s are fixed. They're not. They're actually moving down in the market, because when technology first comes out, then it is new, then it is disruptive, then it has all of this unleveraged potential. But as soon as companies start playing around with it and using it to introduce their own products and services, they very quickly, from the perspective of other companies, become plateau 2 innovations. The technology has been found out, the markets have been defined, organizational responses have been measured, and we sort of start knowing what the answers to particular questions are. The innovation is not that new and disruptive anymore. It has become the market standard. And if you look at that, actually, we see the plateaus moving in a downward line. They're going from the top right to the top left, to the bottom left. So the reason why we need to innovate is that even if you innovate at a slow pace, even if you move to plateau 2, you're going to be in plateau 1 in a short while, because by the time you've walked up, the circle has moved down and you're back to square one. So even to stay relevant in the market, you need to innovate. So it's like walking up an escalator. And if you want to really innovate and lead your market, you need to go faster than market pace. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should lead their market. I'm very comfortable with companies that want to stay where they are and be a fast follower, or even slower than that. But even in that position, you need to continue to innovate. Now, it becomes much easier to adopt other people's ideas and techniques, but still you have to change your own organization and manage that impact. And this is what I call flow. So the concept of innovation flow is the notion that you need continuous development of innovation, not start to innovate when you think you have a bright idea, but make sure that you have a continuous flow of bright ideas to make sure that you can keep walking on this escalator and make sure that you stay in place, or maybe grow to this next level in your market. And the key to doing that is creating a transformation of ownership from the innovator or the team that does the innovation into the business to create business as usual. So between the three circles, we actually have three different levels of agility, I guess. The first circle is the business agility. It is the staying nimble and responding to change within your current market and within your current organization. So within the activities that you currently do, that's what we call business agility. That's agile ways of working, if you will. Now, on the second level is you need to constantly be able to create innovations that are, from the top right in plateau 1 to all through the plateau 2 level. And that is the concept of continuous innovation. You need to be constantly generating a flow of ideas that you can test out and see what works well for your company. And then in the end, you have your strategic options. You need continuous strategic options and be on the lookout for what's coming your way. Because if you're well prepared here, you're very receptive for here. And some companies will say, just being on the lookout is not good enough. We need to develop it and change and disrupt from within our organization. These are very successful companies that do this, like Google and Apple. We don't all need to be a Google and Apple, but it's very good to understand why you're here and what you're doing there. Now, the concept of innovation flow actually creates a culture, which is beliefs and habits, of making sure that we continuously try to reach the plateau 2. And if you are ready for flow, if your company understands how to do that, you will actually create faster and cheaper reorganizations. You'll be agile and adaptive, but you also understand that you might need to change some additional structures. Now, managing transformation of ownership actually allows for an optimal performance of the ownership of the business of that innovation. So I would like to refer to the assumption that was put on earlier that the launch of the innovation is actually the success point. It's not. The launch of the innovation is where the business takes over. And the business, as we know, is centered here and not here. So we need to make this transformation of ownership. We need to get the business to understand how to use this innovation, how to make sure that we replace something else by this innovation. There is an important book I forgot the author's name, but it is a book that is about learning to forget your current practices and then adopt your new practices. But learning to forget your old stuff is as important as adopting the new ones. So creating innovation flow, creating a fast funnel of continuous ideas to be tested is one thing. but also managing the transformation so that the innovative ideas can become your business as usual is second. And managing innovation flow is about creating a low barrier to entry, making sure anyone can participate. And those of you who have innovation departments, I would suggest stop innovating yourself as a department and start coaching your colleagues out in the entire organization on how to innovate in their line of business, on their processes or their bright ideas. I was with a UK telecom company where a guy presented an idea for a new type of cable that would connect a device in the home of private individuals to the socket on their wall. And the device, the new type of cable, could save 19 million UK pounds per year. And when the senior manager asked him, that's just a great plan. You know, it's one cable. It makes life a lot simpler. It saves lots of money. How long have you had this idea? And he said, 16 years. And the reason why he hadn't come up with this idea earlier, because he said, I didn't know who to talk to. So create low barriers to entry, open up for good ideas from people. But second of all, make sure everybody works in sync. One of the biggest cost factors in corporate innovation is start-stop effect. We need to find out how to start up a project, make it a project. We try to apply lean startup metrics, but it's different for everyone. We don't know when to stop or pull the plug. Make sure that you have one process where you have all actors working in sync, and then start managing that process. Don't care about the innovations. The innovations are important, but they are important for the business managers and for the people involved in using the value. They shouldn't be managing the process of innovation itself. So get somebody to manage that process, and I'll get back to you on how. And then when you have a whole lot of these innovations, manage that portfolio for value. So in the continuous innovation framework that I'll show you in a minute, we have a weighing mechanism for trying to find out, for prioritizing the portfolio of innovations that you have. If you have 50 ideas, which one to pick? The method is called weighted fastest innovation first. It's an adaptation of the Agile WSJF. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but if you're in Agile organizations, you probably know WSJF. We've made an adaptation specifically for innovations on that. And focus on strategic objectives. Don't innovate because you have a great idea. Innovate because you have a problem. And make sure that your senior management identifies that problem and pushes you in the right direction for solutions. And manage, and that's the most important one, manage your capacity without delay. If somebody has a good idea, don't tell them to wait 2 months before you have developers available. Make sure that developers are available for the most valuable ideas that you have. So the notion here is that don't start looking for capacity for your innovations, but have capacity reserved, have a continuous batch of capacity, i.e. developers, marketeers, business owners. Understand that you continuously have people available to work on innovations and then bring innovations to them. So don't bring people to the innovations, bring innovations to the people. And you manage that through portfolio management. Then when the innovations have proved themselves to be valuable and you go into the scale-up phase, or if you're out of the early scale-up phase and you want to make it bigger, make sure that you get a controlled transfer of ownership to the business. A gradual adoption. So the first and most important rule and the biggest mistake in corporate innovation is that when you think you're out of the lean startup phase or you're out of experimentation, you assign it to the business and that's the handover. In the continuous innovation framework, we have 18 weeks of experimentation and usually up to 18 months for the transfer of ownership. And that's what we call the scale-up phase. Transfer takes months, not minutes. Make sure that you spend time on transferring the innovation ownership from the people who worked out the initial idea and who were in the experimentation through the board to the business. And transfer is always overseen by senior management. We don't just hand it off to the business and tell them, good luck, make sure it works, but actually oversee that transfer until it is embedded in your organization. And the metrics, it's not the metrics, but the metrics for that should be non-financial for at least 12 to 18 months. Try to steer clear of financial metrics for the growth of your innovations. And growth targets, and this is very important, Growth targets replace existing operational targets. If you give an innovation to a line manager with the objective to scale it and to grow it, that manager can be assumed to already have targets that are up to his capacity. So you need to take some of his old targets off and replace them with growth targets for innovation. So it's not uncommon in the projects that we do that we tell line managers that they can do with, let's say, 85 to 90% of their original target. And for the next year, they fill in the other 10 to 15% with growth targets for innovations. Now, this is a very tough pill to swallow for senior leaders or for operational managers. And the reason why is that because we actually tell them to take the cost of innovation into account. So transfer of ownership is usually done as a handoff to the business, thinking that they will, that they will solve the problems of how to manage that against the running business. It's not. We should very carefully manage that together with senior management. So we've created a continuous innovation framework, a blueprint for a process on how you manage this. And it's very lightweight. It's not something new. It's just telling different people in your organization to do different things at different times. So on the left side, create that flow of innovations where you have short cycle development. We call it switches, 6-week innovation challenges, 6-week periods where we have trying something out, pitching it to the board, trying something out, pitching it to the board, trying something out, pitching it to the board. That's your regular lean startup experimentation. We just gave it a way of working in 6 weeks. Before that, we have an idea, get it validated, and then experiment in a lean startup way. Create as many ideas as you can or as many as you want to spend capacity on and manage that portfolio for value. And here's the WFIF, weighted fastest innovation first prioritization in the portfolio. And that portfolio is managed on the strategic level based on the budget that we have and the strategic value goals that are set by the senior management. On the right side of the framework, for you on the right side of the framework, we have the controlled transfer of ownership. And that is actually what we call scaling up. I know that the definitions vary a little bit, but scaling up for us means everything after we've proven a product market fit, scaling up to embedding in the organization. This is where we transfer ownership. The dark blue represents the ownership by the business. The light blue represents the ownership by the innovation organization and the board. And there is always a senior management, continuous innovation board, a senior leadership. It's strategic level. There is always an ambassador guiding the transfer of ownership to the business. And they have very clear and understandable metrics for everyone that they set, and they keep working in these short-cycled iterations to grow the innovation until it gets embedded in the organization itself, where we can understand that innovations might actually offer a need or have a need to change current architecture, to change our current competencies and skills, to change and adapt our processes, and maybe re-look at how we do partnerships. So we manage not just the scale up or the growth of that individual idea, but we actually manage the organizational change that is included with the business owners here. So,
sorry, if you want to recap, I do see some questions coming in too.
Yep.
So, Jean, would you like to come on mic and ask your question?
Sure, thanks a lot, and great presentation. I guess my question is, what is the best way of getting some kind of agreement from the core before you start the sort of innovation work, that there will be appetite to scale if the concept works? Because I find that's one of the things we struggle with is you get success with the idea and then there's nobody willing or able to catch it at that point, and then people are like, well, it's a failure then. So how do we get around?
All right. So what we do in the framework is that when an idea gets validated and enters the first switch, the first period of 6 weeks, we need a potential business owner acknowledged and we need a CIB. We need confirmation by the senior leadership of the organization, as high as it goes in the department where you're in, or in the scope of the organization that you're doing this, that they believe this idea might be actually valuable, and they might start to think about where should it land and how does it do that. By the time it reaches the third switch, now this is lightning fast. It's after 18 weeks. Everybody should be aligned. So in 3 corporate presentations, we get the entire organization aligned on, let's spend serious time and money on this, and who is going to be responsible for it. So we try to attract the business owner already in switch 1, but at least in switch 2. By the speed that you create in this system, you create an organization that is also ready and aligned to absorb that kind of ownership. But then we don't give ownership in one go. We tell people to keep on developing. So even if this business owner at first is uncomfortable, he doesn't get full ownership in the beginning. We work with these people to gradually grow this innovation in their line of business. But we do know that capacity and money are reserved for it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That's great.
Good. Any more questions? So, by the way, this is, we've had the smoothest transition from presentation to questions, because I'm now at the end of my presentation. But if you have any questions or remarks, you can use Menti if you want to ask the questions, or use the chat.
Yeah, we do have some coming through the chat. I have one more as well. Which steps would you see to build up the framework? As I assume, one cannot implement in one step.
No, and it's actually not advisable to do so. It's a growth model, if you will, but definitely the stuff you want to start with is the switches. So switches bring extreme focus to the development of innovations, and not just for the people developing the innovation, but also for the senior leadership that needs to decide on whether they want to spend capacity and money on this. Now, to give you a brief notion of a switch, it is 5 people, we call the innovation team, that work 1 day a week for 6 weeks on the development of their idea. So they have an idea, it gets validated, and we build the biggest fail factor hypothesis for this idea. So, to give you an idea, we want to develop artificial intelligence to better focus our call center actions and create the best shortlist for our call center. The primary hypothesis is when we start calling people up, they will actually respond more positively, or we can technically build the AI. The biggest fail factor would be that people will actually change their habits. So we don't build the AI, we just do the math by hand, start calling up people in the call center and prove our point. Now that's what we do in 6 weeks, 1 day a week for 6 weeks. And after that, we pitch to the board. And the board gets together once every 6 weeks for 2.5, 3 hours. And they watch all of the pitches from these ideas going on. And that's the cadence that you want. A number of teams doing 1 day a week for 6 weeks as a team, fully focused on their innovation, no other work, 1 day a week, 6 Mondays, 6 Tuesdays, whatever, and then pitch to the board. Now, by doing the 6-week innovation challenges, you create a really dynamic environment on innovation. But you'll quickly run into portfolio management problems, and you'll run, after 18 weeks, you'll get the first scale-up problem. So you do switches first, which is this end, and then you start engaging in portfolio management and scale-up. And scale-up involves the same board, but it also starts a structured process with the business owners and innovation metrics. We would advise that by that time, it's also a good idea to start thinking about very determining value goals that are linked to strategy. But for some companies, they'll say, we need more idea generation, or, we need to work with architecture to create a more adaptable or more adaptive architecture. But, get the engine running. That's the first one. And then portfolio management and scaling up. That's the second line. By the way, this is all on a website that is continuousinnovation.net. And it is available for free. So if you go to the website, you'll see this chart, and you can click on the icons and you get a full explanation of everything that's there. It's available for free. there is no, you don't have to sign up. It's just there. You can do whatever you want with it. It's a proven model. It's been implemented in a number of corporates. There are official trainings available. That is the business model that drives this, but the actual model itself is available for free, and you can check out everything that I've just mentioned on how that works.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah, actually, Keith had a question. Would you like to come on, Mike? Just unmute yourself.
Sure. We've just got a few moments. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So quick question about the coaching. Very interesting idea, but getting the business to sort of provide people to participate has been a challenge when the things we're working on are not that close to their core. So It probably comes back to what you were saying about not trying to jump too far out, but any thoughts on what it looks like to get the business to participate in that?
Yes. Thanks for asking this question. So in some companies, it's real easy. People can just, take their time off, and some people even call it the Google Friday. But in effect, some line managers are really not so happy to see their people working on other stuff. So there are a few strategies. One is that if the idea gets presented to senior management that we call the Continuous Innovation Board, they can put out a decree that says these people should work on it, but they need to address it with the business owners that they should free up this capacity. And I've done this in a corporate where business owners were not all too happy, but senior leadership wanted to increase innovation skills in the company. So they said, we need to do it. They said, we don't want that. So we did it for 6 weeks. And they said, well, okay, 6 weeks, 1 day a week, we can manage. And then came the second switch, and they said, you know what, that's 3 months. I'm missing people from my team for 1 day a week. This gets really, really difficult. And we said, well, they're delivering value because the board says, this is an interesting innovation. And then we found out that, 18 weeks, another switch, and these people would just blow up and start a crisis with their bosses, probably here, saying, you cannot give us these targets. You cannot hold us to achieving our goals if our people are involved in innovation for that much time. And we actually found out through trial and error that 3 switches is the maximum that you can stretch business owners on that capacity. So even in the organizations that go out and where it happens more or less automatically after 18 weeks, you've fully reached your limits. You've extended all of the goodwill in the company, and then you need to decide, put money and capacity to it formally, and reduce targets. So it's a different, or it's a very interesting discussion that you're going to have. But yeah. I'm personally convinced that it takes that discussion to create the culture of innovation in your organization. If you don't do that discussion on how much capacity are we willing to spend on innovation, it'll become a formality and it will not work.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. And we have a lot more questions, but unfortunately we do have to end the session. We have another one right now. So please do continue to reach out, use the community platform, or reach out to Arent yourself. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. Very insightful, very engaging. And we will make the recording available. Arent, any last words from you?
No, feel free, anyone in the group, feel free to contact me on my email address or through our LinkedIn group that we have. I'm always happy to answer your questions. Look forward to interacting with you further. And thanks for your attention.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day and see you in the next session, maybe.
Thanks.